All right. Okay. I started a little bit of the problem here because I didn't get started. So thank you for being patient. For those here, we are getting ready to launch another episode, episode 9 of Be Connected. What in the world? And I love Brent's questions. Are you frustrated to get more clients? And we're going to get into that. So get ready and strap in. And I'm going to go quickly for those that aren't here. If you feel like you're in the middle of a conversation, I know like series of episodes on like Netflix or whatever where you can kind of binge through. And like I said, this is episode 9. There's several episodes leading up to here, and I will help you with that. Right now, I'm short a wingman, but I have people in the chat here that can help me out. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and just talk just a little bit, and not it's not that important. Frankly, if you go back to previous episodes, I've been introduced. People kind of have shared my background, introduced me. There's nothing worse than having to talk about your own credentials when you're leading into a conversation. So, but I'm going to do it just so that you kind of know my background is transformational leadership, transformational business, doing large scale back transformations and outsourcing, you number of things. I was a corporate vice president partner, was predominantly in the putting together of very large transactions and so on, which really required building relationships with leaders and influencers, as we call them today. Do a lot of other things we won't get into now, really bringing that to the table here with BeeKonnected to share with you and just give you a sense of the things to consider if you're looking to have a conversation and build a relationship that ultimately leads with a large win-win proposition for leaders. So that's the extent of the introduction I'm going to do of myself. And I do have Rickey Jean Wright, who should be joining and is having some difficulties. Like I said, messed it up myself. Brent, glad to have you here. Randy Sablik is here in the chat. He is an amazing wingman. He always has the right questions. So this is going to be an episode that is really designed for somebody like Randy Sablik. So Randy, if you see any questions, Brent put one in the chat already, is frustrating to get more clients. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to give you some context. So let me first talk about the introduction. So what we talked about several episodes, really in the first episode as on this series of attracting influencers, we talked and spent 30 minutes. And by the way, this is a 30-minute show. So we started a little bit late, but we will end this show at the bottom of the hour, maybe a couple minutes past, just to make sure we get the content in. But we're not going to cover all this stuff. But we talked about what is an influencer. We had a great discussion with Nathan and Christy and Rickey and any number of people on what an influencer really is. And if you want to kind of get a sense of what that looks like, go back to that episode. Then also, we then talked about the attraction mindset. So when we talked about what is an influencer, we talked about the popularity, their expertise, credibility, those things. We talked about mindset. We talked about going into the way of actually reaching out. And so some people, they see a problem, they want to be reactive, they're waiting for them, lone wolf, hard worker, the relationship builder, and ultimately the challenger, which really is the approach that I recommend and the approach that I use to do billions of dollars worth of business, as well as the approach that I use to make a pretty good living for myself. So that's kind of what the basis of where we're going is going forward. And then we talked about approach. We talked about, first of all, going in previous episodes, researching and identifying, establishing credibility, generating insight, then and only then initiating contact, and then getting into the collaborative dialogue. So really, in the 2 episodes ago, we talked about, okay, so those first 3 steps are really intended to build trust, to develop strategic questions, to ensure the understanding of prospective solutions that you might be bringing to the table. And once you kind of have as much as you can learn, develop, research, then you're ready to make the contact or have that initial meeting. So that's where we got to in the last couple of episodes. We talked about this collaborative dialogue, and we talked about things to do right. And if you saw the last episode that I did, where we had just come out of a discussion with the corporate leadership of a very large network marketing company that we were familiar with, and we kind of knew a lot of the answers to those questions, and we had an experience, and we talked about that. You want to get some insights there. I'm not going to call out anybody, but we had corporate leadership here at BeeKonnected involved, and we're still moving down that path, but we learned some stuff, and so we shared some of that, and so we got into that. And today we're going to talk. This is the content. We're going to talk about the first set of questions, which is situational questions. If you look at a consultative or a collaborative dialogue process or challenging process, the first step is situational questions. And we're going to talk about the difference between pre-pandemic and today. And then we'll talk and get into problem questions, which is really the meat. And that's about all we're going to be able to get to today. So I see Rickey Jean is actually in transit here. And Rickey, welcome. Rickey, as I said before, is a serial entrepreneur. He is an old school guy, so he's going to relate to some of these things in terms of sales and building relationships from his past. I'm not going to get into all of his past, but Rickey, how are you doing today? It looks like you're driving.
Well, actually, I'm sitting in my driveway because the contractors took over the house,
Oh
and
no.
they're putting they're in every room of the house making noises, putting the baseboard down, the final step. So I
Yeah.
have nowhere to go. So
Well, you know what they say is the true greats actually play hurt or play without things being perfect. So I appreciate you joining us here. We have Brent and Randy Sablick's on, and we may have some other folks here joining us. So I'm going to be asking you some questions today. I'm going to drive, and again, we started a little bit late, Rickey, because I messed up and didn't get things set up properly as I thought I had. And so we're going to probably go for about another 30 minutes, 20 minutes. I mean, another 20 minutes. So, this is going to be a 30-minute show. So as I kind of did a previously on BeeKonnected, what in the world? I just did that recap. And now we're going to go back to the whole thing about the really going into the approach and pre-post and getting into the problem questions. So Rickey, I'm gonna kind of tap your experience, but the situational question, when you talk about consulting with people, kind of finding out things, I asked Cheryl this, and we've talked about these things. And one of the things that we talked about in previous episodes is not rushing in to have a conversation before you've done some research. And the research predominantly should be around situations. So when you think of situational questions, and I'm going to qualify this as pre-pandemic. So I'm going to distinguish between the two in a second. When you look at pre-pandemic, Rickey, back in the day when you were a manufacturer's rep and you went in to talk to somebody, what were kind of some of those situational questions that you would ask? I mean, obviously you probably knew something about their business a little bit, but when you start first, let's say your very first conversation where you were going to offer them some kind of solution or whatever, what kind of questions did you ask?
well, the thing that always was a roadblock, and I had to get past the roadblock, was were they going to use an engineering firm that was going to uh, specify something that had no equal? If that was the case, I had to be that specified no equal uh, piece of equipment, valve or actuator, or because if they were going to do that and I wasn't that particular product specified with no equal, then I was out of the ball game. So
So
I
when you,
had to overcome the obstacle and find out what what were they going to do.
so, and you went into that, we talked a lot in the,
In some instances,
no, I was going to say, and again, the best bet, since you are mobile, is there's a little bit of a delay. So let me try and keep this from. So yeah, short response is great. So the key here is that you would have to get some answers to that questions, kind of knowing how they were going about the business. And yeah, Randy, I recognize he was breaking up, so that's one of the reasons why we're kind of doing this. So, but let me see if I can paraphrase. So normally prior to the pandemic, and here's again where I was going to go with this, is I said pre-pandemic, which is the situational. There's a process. It's how to do consultative or collaborative sales, if you will, and it's called spin selling. And there's a book written by that. It goes back in the 1980s. And frankly, that was what I now call the challenger approach that we use consultatively in that. In the beginning, the client partner or the person that was going to try and get things moving with a client, you would go in, and as I mentioned in the last episode that we were talking about when Cheryl was joining me, is that because when I was working for Accenture, we had consultants, industry experts, things like that. We had a lot of research going in, kind of knowing the answers to some of those questions that you're wanting to know. Are you using an engineering firm? Are you doing this or that? Which would then really position you to not really knowing, or to know whether you had a viable solution or not. So that's great. The key is, in today's post-pandemic, as we all know, in-person meetings to kind of unearth or reveal their situation when you're talking about a client isn't very practical. And in fact, most clients today don't even have, or most prospective partners or whatever, however you want to define them, they don't have a lot of patience for situational questions. When we talked before doing research, that's really where you want to do it today. You want to be as prepared as possible in the post-pandemic way to go in and where you kind of already understand the situation. Now, one of the things we discovered in our meeting last Wednesday that preceded the last episode, when we were meeting with Pampered Chef, was there's a lot of things you can go in and you can assume if they're a direct sales company and they have these things. But if you don't know the company and you don't know what they perceive as the area, then you still got to validate that situation. So in other words, if you say, well, they've got a large audience and they need to monetize that audience. Well, maybe they already have. Maybe they're comfortable with that. So you that first set of questions, you're really asking them questions to validate what you think you know. And that's one of the areas where I think we fell short when we had our meeting last Wednesday, was we didn't validate or get feedback, or we didn't allow time in that first initial contact for them to correct us with our assumption of their situation. Does that make sense? Right. So, and I'm not going to do a lot, but I appreciate, Rickey, I know you're breaking up a little bit, but appreciate you sharing that thought, because I knew you'd have a good example. I know Zip is now on the call as well, and he's kind of listening, but in his business where he's doing packaging and talking to large companies and so on, he knows that business very well. And I would imagine and Zip, you're welcome to verify it, but I'm sure when you're going to call on a prospective prospect, you don't kind of go in and ask them these basic situational questions because you know the industry and you probably have done some research. Is my assumption correct there, Zip?
I've done it in the old days, before internet, you just walked in and started a conversation. Nowadays, you got to do a little bit of research on LinkedIn or their website, but you got to find out what their pain point is.
Okay, well, pain point is a different set of questions. Situation is leading up to the pain point. That's really great. Appreciate you sharing that. And I like the way you phrased that too, Zip, which is back in the old days prior to the internet. It's really back in the day prior to where everybody was kind of dependent on the internet and nobody is entertaining frivolously in-person meetings anymore. So you can't just come in, cold call, cold visit, that kind of thing, to then have a conversation where you can start with situational questions. So that was the point, is basically when you talk about situation, you need to cut that to almost nothing. That needs to be something when you're going in to talk to a substantial leader or an influencer, you need to be going in doing that kind of research that you, Zip, I know today in the world you're in today, right? You kind of know the answers to those. You kind of go in and you have a pretty good idea, but you still can't just launch into your sales pitch and say, I know you got this problem. Don't just shut up and listen, go through it, right? You've got to validate that assumption. And so that's important. So then where you really want to get to, and you brought it up, Zip, and that is the problem questions. So once you've validated your assumption, then those situational insights should give you some good problem questions. So in other words, when it comes to, I'll give it back to you, Zip, when it comes to packaging, what's a typical problem given the situation? Let's hypothetical or real that you've had. What's a typical problem that they have that you can offer a solution to?
Well, a lot of people, let's take stretch film. Stretch film, as I had called it, was everybody used at 80 or 90 gauge. And that's kind of like, and both you guys remember when cars were made out of tin and steel. Now we've engineered plastic so well, everything's made out of plastic. And the same thing goes with stretch film. We can get down to a 50 gauge or 45 gauge and give them better protection and use less film.
Yeah. So the question, yeah. So without getting into all the specifics, really one of the things you're saying is the problem that creates then is potentially they're spending too much money for the film. They're bringing a solution to the table that maybe worked at one point, but now things have changed, and that's great. That is a legitimate problem, and then the implications of the problem you just described, which we're not going to get too much into the implications questions because that then is further, evolving our discussion or conversation with them. And we'll talk about more of that on the next episode because this is only 30 minutes, is that you go in and you're now trying to get to those, I say problem, okay to call it pain points. These are not things that are, quote, industry now. These are specific acknowledged answers to a question of, now that I've validated that you're maybe using this kind of packaging material, or you're using Zoom on to do your meetings, right? And now, or you're using LinkedIn to kind of corral your prospects or manage your network and your communications. Whatever that situation might be, it may be okay. They might not perceive it as a problem. So the problem questions are really intended, as we said, to go in there and based upon some of that information, either you've gathered through research and then validated, or maybe you just know that, do they see it as a problem? Sometimes they say, I don't see it as a problem, right? They don't.
Yep.
What and guess what? If they don't see it as a problem, how much traction are you going to get to move through the consultative process? Then you have to challenge that. And it's hard to challenge that. You've got to be ready and really have your ducks in a row and be willing to do that. And we're not going to get into that part of the discussion today, because that's really the next step when you're getting into
well, but what you're doing is you're probing a little bit. Maybe they say, I asked for 5 minutes, I asked for 300 seconds, and try to, when I first get in the door, just see what they're doing. I asked to try to go through their warehouse, if that's a possibility, and then listen to them and say, well, everything's fine. Well, okay. When's the last time you checked the price, or when's the last time you looked at something new? You're open to ideas.
Right.
And if they say they aren't, then you might as well walk out the door.
Yeah. Well, then you've had a learning experience that you'll revisit at some point, because really, when you're doing this approach, this consultative approach, right, you want to maintain the relationship. So at this juncture, there's not a pain there. And if you try to continue to push to offer the solution, then you're not going to get very far, and probably just irritate them. And actually, again, we didn't get to that point of irritation, but when we're having that conversation, I think we made some assumptions. But every company is different, right? I don't care if they're a direct sales, network marketing, affiliate-based company, coach, whatever. Just because they have those labels doesn't mean they aren't unique. And they have, some of them consider themselves, that's their claim to fame. So going in and saying, I got a solution for this, they say, I don't need a solution for that, right? And one of the things we talked about before is that BeeKonnected is it's always going to be, even if you're not going to a large organization, you got to realize this is a complex product. It has a lot of different features, a lot of different functions. There's a ton of value propositions on all components of that, and expecting them to buy it all or have a problem with everything is kind of naive, right? They may be okay. They may not in one particular area. So you don't want to focus on that. So when you go through the situational research, Randy made a great point in the chat. He said, it's really called qualifying the customer. And I think if you want to use that term as qualifying the customer in today's world, you really want to realize that that's the research you need to do ahead of time. Yeah, Rickey, go ahead.
Am I can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're not breaking up for the moment.
I took it off the radio in my vehicle, so it's not a. So anyway, here's a question that I'm trying to get an answer to.
Okay.
When you go into the big influencer or the company, are you talking to them about having one account that's being paid for and everybody else is free?
Good question. And the answer is maybe. When you go into a large, seriously, I'm just going to be real with you. Mm-hmm. When you go in and talk to a large organization, it would depend. For example, like we were just talking to Pampered Chef, and you're not going to necessarily get to that kind of discussion until you've actually determined if any component of our overall value proposition works for them. You've got to kind of understand how because we can save them a lot of money. We can improve efficiency. We can add features and functions that can be available at all levels, right? So you're really asking then a question that goes further down when they look at objections and looking at that, which we're not going to get into today. But the answer is, it depends. That's part of your research. Your assumption is this. You may not know anything about their compensation plan. You might know direct sales or network marketing or those kind of companies and how they generally work. But I can tell you for a fact, they're not all the same. And some of them might say, yeah, it's not worth it to me, but yeah, that's a great tool set to offer. And it's a value add. I can throw it in and let my leaders, consultants, people that have the means, because they're all independent business owners for the most part anyway, right? Is they can go in and they can say, I'm not into that. Some companies may say, okay, I see the value of this across the board, and I want every consultant at every level to use the tool, and I want to eliminate that, and I want them to use more than just the free capability. So here's what I want to do. I want a enterprise license. If you look at, in the case of BeeKonnected, we have that option, but that's a discussion. It's not like, okay, it's either free or $19.95 or $49.95, or ultimately when we get into the premium content, $99.95. It can be different, and that's okay for the large organization. So that's a great question. The key here is that when you get into these discussions, kind of knowing where it's going to go. And here's something we'll talk about in previous, what I would call approach discussions, really, is the situation of when to bring in those kind of questions and when to go. So as we said, situational insights, which was what we were talking about with Zip and you, is kind of already knowing that, generally speaking, a lot of the companies that are doing business, doing online shows, doing online meetings with they have trouble closing sales, maybe conversion, those kinds of things, but maybe not. We discovered that wasn't, that company felt pretty good about their conversions. So going in without really everybody knowing that wasn't the big hot button, other than the attribution part of our P3 system and stuff, it didn't work that well. So again, we learn. And the thing is, we got another meeting. So a successful call or a successful first step, or this was like the third or fourth step, is the fact that we have another step. We have another meeting. So either you close the deal, which you shouldn't expect to do prematurely, and then we went into the setting up the next meeting. So again, the situational for today usually result of good research, good qualification, as Randy put it, and so on. The other thing is,
so Dave.
Yes,
So Dave,
go ahead.
here's something. This is still pretty new, okay, for BeeKonnected.
Right.
We're still in the pioneer stage of going out and getting customers, influencers, and stuff like that. And we don't know what some of their pain points are, as I say, or what they're really looking. But we have to kind of say, and here's what I do as on new products and stuff. Hey, I need your help. We got new at stuff. I know a lot, but we're looking. Other people are looking at this. I thought you might be interested in it, and tell them a wide variety of stuff, and see what might catch their interest, rather than you go and focus in on one thing, and then at the end of the presentation, they say, "Oh, we wanted to know about XYZ," and you told them about ABC. So right. I mean, it's one of those things. I think it's a difficult. It's a new product out there, and we're putting a lot into it. Everything's not new, but we're putting a lot of new things into BeeKonnected, and yeah, that so.
Well, one of the things you said there, you actually said a couple of things, and that's good input. And again, we're not going to get as much into tactics. Actually, when we get into process, which is a ways down the road, we talk about approach, but then we've got process and some other things we're going to get into as we go a little further into this whole attracting and engaging influencers. Is that the important thing is that you can go in with assumptions, but as I said before, BeeKonnected is not a one-trick pony, right? It's not just this feature or this, it's not just Zoom. It's not just LinkedIn. It's not just group features. It's not just offering premium content. It's all of those. So doing the research and then kind of making some assumptions, but not, waiting to validate those, again, is that situational, and to find which one are ones or what's ones that do they have some problems with. And then that's where you get into that. And then the other thing is, as Zip had said, and I agree, our product or service has numerous value points. So some of our questions around the problem that they might have or their pain point can not just be driven by the situational, but our knowledge of BeeKonnected and the capabilities it has from our own experience or our own observed experience from other people using the platform. Those would inform, and I recommend that as we go into this, and we're going to land the plane here, is that our services and capabilities can be modified and aligned with them, but we can't do that unless we ask those good problem questions. And I would say go through and look at the situation, not only validate your assumption of their situation in that particular area of using the types of tools that we have, but then talk about possibilities. What would the implication be? And this is what so I'm going to kind of pause it here. We're going to land the plane. Is the next step is then we're going to go into the implications. Again, talking about, okay, if you have that problem or think you're okay, then what would the implication be if everybody that was in your sphere of influence, if you're an influencer, would be accruing another revenue stream to you, let's say? Or what if everybody that you're talking, what if you didn't have to pay, $400 a month for an enterprise account to do all those, there's just a lot of possible implication questions. Or what does it look like because this is what you're doing? Those can be exploratory questions that you can ask, even if they don't perceive it as a problem, because they don't perceive or understand BeeKonnected, as Zip said. So I think that's brilliant. Well, I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, Randy, for your questions and thoughts. And yeah, there's a lot of things that we can really do better in any area, not just in BeeKonnected. So the key is going in and having that dialogue. And we've said that over and over in the previous episodes, is the most important thing is asking the right questions. And that's why I love Randy, is because he doesn't always have all the answers, but he has a lot of great questions. So he who asks the most questions often wins. So, and by the way, when you're asking questions and they're responding to your questions, who has the control? You do. So you've got to realize that when you're giving them an opportunity to answer a question or even challenge the possibility that you threw out there, you're the one that's in control. And then
unless you're asking your daughters.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you with 5 kids and grandkids and stuff like that, Zip brings up a great point. Just think about when you are talking to and getting challenged by your people. But again, if you're in control and you're asking the questions, and so if your kids are asking the questions all the time and you're just trying to justify or respond, guess who's in control? They are too. So I appreciate everybody being here. We're going to be back again Wednesday at 7:30 Central. If I have a couple of coaches here, we're going to get into a little more of the problem and get into the implication questions. And again, to be clear, we're just skimming the surface here for this series. For those that are interested in really getting what I would call world-class skill sets in doing this and growing their community on BeeKonnected, growing their business on anywhere, we're going to have some premium content. I'm going to have some premium content available within the Warrior Networking group that you'll be able to sign up for. And if you know me, it won't be that expensive, but it will be infinitely valuable, if I may say so myself. So thank you, Rickey. Thank you, Zip. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Brent, for joining us, and anybody else that sees this in replay. And we'll see you back 7:30 Central Daylight Time on Wednesday here at BeeKonnected. What in the world? Thanks, guys.
Have a great evening.
All right.